Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot onto the cold-packed earth of a medieval peasant's bedroom, if you can even call it that. There's a dog snoring under the bed, which is really just a pile of straw crawling with things you try not to think about. The fire in the hearth has gone out hours ago, and your breath puffs visibly in the dark. Outside, something howls, or maybe it's just your neighbor's baby again. Either way, tonight isn't about comfort, it's about survival. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I promise your bed sounds like heaven compared to this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by ducking your head under a rough wooden beam. Careful not to knock over the pot of stale cabbage stew next to the bed. You don't want that sloshing onto your only pair of shoes. The floor is dirt, not rustic hardwood, not uneven tile. Dirt. It gets damp in the winter, turns dusty in the summer, and is constantly tracked with manure, hay, and the occasional chicken dropping. Shoes, maybe, if you're lucky. Otherwise, your bare feet are calloused enough to count as armor. The bed, if your family even has one, is likely handmade from splintered wood. The mattress is stuffed with straw, or, worse, heather and moss. Good for insulation, terrible for your back. And let's not even start on the bugs. Medieval sleep came with a side of lice, fleas, and whatever else decided to join you under the itchy wool blanket, and that blanket probably shared with at least 2 other people, none of whom smell particularly fresh. Privacy is a fantasy. You sleep, eat, argue, and give birth all in the same single-room home. Your parents are there, your siblings are there, and so are the chickens. The concept of your room didn't really exist unless you were nobility. And even then, someone was always eavesdropping through the walls or through the gaps in the wood. The air smells of smoke and livestock. Your family burns peat, sticks, or animal dung to keep warm, but it rarely gets warm enough. Instead, the fire smolders low in the center of the room, coughing up greasy smoke that stains the beams black. You're used to it. But the sting in your eyes and throat is always there. Historians still argue whether medieval respiratory issues were caused more by smoke inhalation or unwashed laundry. Probably both. Noise constant. Snoring, wheezing, mumbling, scratching. The pigs snort. The dog whines. And your uncle mutters in his sleep about stolen turnips again. If someone has a cough, you're all going to hear it. For weeks. And forget about sleeping in. Roosters scream at dawn. And your workday begins before the sun even shows its face. You might get 6 hours of broken sleep on a good night, with dreams full of whatever you last ate, which, realistically, was probably onions. Now here's the weird part: you don't sleep all the way through. Most peasants practiced segmented sleep, where the night was split into 2 distinct chunks, with a period of wakefulness in the middle. You go to bed after sundown, sleep a few hours, then wake for maybe an hour or 2 talking, praying, stoking the fire, or just lying there. Then drift back to sleep until dawn. In a way, that mid-sleep window was the medieval version of late-night scrolling, except no screens, just the occasional fleet of squash. It sounds bizarre. But modern studies suggest our bodies might still be wired for that 2-phase rhythm. Some people naturally wake in the middle of the night and assume something's wrong. But back then, it was just the way of things. You weren't alone in that eerie midnight hush. A quirky little tidbit for you: some peasant homes carved beds directly into wall alcoves. They were like wooden cubbies with curtains that could be drawn shut for a bit of warmth and fake privacy. They looked cozy until you realized your entire family might be stacked in there like firewood. Oh, and beds weren't always used lying down. In fact, many people slept semi-upright, propped on bolsters or wooden frames. Lying flat was thought to invite illness or death. The dead lay flat, the living less so. You settle into your straw mattress, pull a scratchy blanket over your shoulders, and try to ignore the cold creeping in through the cracks in the walls. You can hear wind whistling past, and the distant bark of a dog or maybe a wolf. Your nose is freezing, your feet are numb, and your stomach is still grumbling, but you're used to it. This is just sleep, not a luxury, not a recharge, just the nightly ritual of surviving another day so you can suffer through the next one. By now, the warmth of the fire is long gone, and the cold is sinking in deep. Not just the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but the kind that seeps into your bones, settling in your joints like a permanent tenant. Winter nights in the Middle Ages weren't just inconvenient, they were life-threatening, especially for peasants like you, tucked away in drafty wattle and daub huts with more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese. There are no chimneys. Not yet. Those won't become common in peasant homes until much later. Instead, smoke from the central hearth rises straight up or tries to then hovers just below the thatch roof, forming a slow, rolling cloud that curls down into your lungs. Some families cut a tiny hole in the ceiling to let it out, but more often, they just deal with it. You can't afford to lose heat, even if it means breathing in soot every night of your life. Historians still argue whether this smoke actually helped preserve thatched roofs by keeping bugs at bay, or just made everything smell like a roasted goat. So how do you survive the brutal cold? Layering helps if you even own extra clothes. Most peasants sleep in their work tunics, wrapping themselves in whatever spare fabric they have: old cloaks, patched up linens, even animal hides. If you're lucky, there's a sheepskin somewhere in the house, stiff from age and smelling distinctly like it still remembers the sheep. If you're not lucky, well, you might be cuddling with your goat. Yes, really. That wasn't just a weird family tradition. Livestock often slept inside with you not because anyone thought it was cute, but because their body heat made the difference between frostbite and making it to spring. The cows might be penned at the far end of the room, snorting and shifting in the night. The chickens, anywhere they feel like being. You once woke up with a hen on your head? She laid an egg. You're still not over it. The hearth is the heart of the house. Even when it's barely burning, it anchors everything. You curl up as close as you dare to the ember glow without singeing your blanket. There's no wood to spare, for a roaring fire fuel is expensive or scarce, so people burn peat, dried animal dung, and sticks. Not ideal. Dung fires stink. Peat burns slow but smoky, and sticks disappear in minutes. Every bit of warmth is rationed, like coins in a poor man's pocket. A fun little fringe practice, some peasants used what's now called a bed warmer. Not the copper pan kind you'd see in wealthier homes, but more like a brick or stone, heated in the fire and wrapped in rags. Tuck it under the covers and pray it doesn't scorch your feet or explode. That happened. If you're in Northern Europe, the winters are even harsher. Temperatures drop below freezing for days at a time. The house itself might frost from the inside. Water in the pitcher freezes solid overnight. You sip from it anyway, because that's your water. And your lips might stick to the rim a little, but you don't complain. You just suck it up, literally. No insulation. Of course, walls are made of woven twigs packed with mud. They crack in the cold and leak when it rains. Windows? If you're really fancy, there's a bit of greased linen stretched across the opening to keep out the wind. Most of the time, though, it's just a wooden shutter you bolt tight against the night and hope nothing gets in. Speaking of getting in, yes, wild animals are a concern. Foxes, wolves, even bears in some regions. But more often, it's the smaller visitors that keep you up. Rats scurry across the rafters, seeking warmth too. They'll gnaw through anything: your food, your blanket, your shoes. They'll even nibble your ears if you hold still long enough. Despite the discomfort, you try to fall asleep again, but your toes are tingling and not in a good way. Maybe you remember hearing about a neighbor who didn't wake up one morning, just froze solid in his sleep, and you think about whether that's better than dying of starvation. Hard to say, but some people tried creative things. A few even slept in shared beds with neighbors to share body heat, especially during travel. That wasn't weird. It was practical. Sure, it made for awkward mornings, especially if someone snored like a dying mule or drooled like a baby goat. but at least your blood kept circulating. A quick bit of trivia to warm you up, literally, there's evidence that some peasants would actually bring hot animals into bed with them. Chickens, yes, but also cats, dogs, and in desperate cases, piglets, not because they were beloved pets, but because they were living hot water bottles with legs. It was efficient and deeply unhygienic, but you're not choosing comfort here. You're choosing to not die. One thing you've learned, don't undress at night. Ever. The cold is too biting. Even removing your belt feels like peeling off a layer of skin. Plus, medieval belts sometimes held little pouches of herbs or charms, things meant to ward off bad dreams, spirits, or general misfortune. You cling to whatever works. Even if it's just superstition, the darkness stretches on, thicker than any blanket. You try not to move too much, since every twitch lets in a fresh stab of cold air. There's no such thing as warmth in winter, only slightly less freezing. And so you shiver, tuck your feet into the folds of your tunic, breathe shallowly to avoid coughing from the smoke, and wait for the rooster's scream. Another night survived. Barely. By the time your eyelids finally start to droop, it happens you wake up. Not because someone screamed, not because of a barking dog or snoring cow, but because your brain just decides it's time. It's not insomnia, it's first sleep. In medieval times, sleep didn't come in one smooth, cozy, 8-hour stretch. No one expected that. Instead, most people slept in two distinct phases, first sleep and second sleep, with an hour or two of wakefulness in between. You drift off shortly after nightfall, maybe around 8 p.m., and wake again somewhere near midnight. Not in a panic, not in frustration, just awake. Fully, calmly, and as though your internal alarm whispered, "Hey, intermission." Historians still debate whether this pattern was natural, cultural, or simply the result of long, dark winters with little to do. But descriptions of it show up again and again in records, diaries, even medical texts. It wasn't considered strange, it was routine. You sleep, wake, and sleep again, like pausing a dream to check on the fire. So here you are, wide awake in the pitch-black middle of the night. Your joints crack as you stretch, and your breath puffs white in the air. The hearth is a faint red glow. You shuffle out from under the blanket, careful not to disturb the blanket's resident lice colony, and reach for a cup of stale ale left from supper. Water's too risky, it might be contaminated. Warm beer, flat and sour, is your nightcap of choice. During this wakeful interval, medieval people did all sorts of things. You might pray. You might mend something by firelight. You might whisper with your spouse, yes. This was a popular time for, let's say, intimate moments. Church texts even recommended it. Others took it as a chance to tend to livestock, check the perimeter, or just sit and reflect. If you lived in a village with a small church, you might hear the monks chanting matins, their own scheduled prayers at roughly this hour. The sound drifts across the frost-bitten fields, low and ghostly, like wind catching a hollow reed. In larger towns, some people even use this time to write letters or visit neighbors. A short visit, of course. No one's looking to host a midnight brunch. For peasants like you, though, the options are limited. Maybe you check on the cow. Maybe you stoke the fire with a few scavenged twigs and dried dung patties. Maybe you just lie still and think about that odd dream where the local miller turned into a goose and demanded your shoes. That's what dreams are like here, bizarre, fleeting, and always slightly stressful. Speaking of dreams, scholars still debate whether segmented sleep changed the quality of dreaming. Some theories suggest that the middle wake period gave people more vivid, memorable dreams in the second half. Others think it made people more aware of their dreams, almost like lucid dreaming centuries before it became trendy on YouTube. In fact, a quirky note from 15th century France describes how one peasant woman believed her dreams during second sleep were messages from the Virgin Mary and began interpreting them for neighbors. The local priest was not thrilled. During this break, the darkness feels heavier. Your eyes adjust, but the room remains a blur of shapes. There's no ambient city glow, no battery-powered nightlight. If the moon's hidden behind clouds, it's true dark, the kind that makes your own hands look like shadows. You blink toward the ceiling, wondering how many spiders are up there right now. Then there's the cold again. Always the cold. It curls up beside you like a second sleeper, whispering, still here. You roll onto your back and try to remember the sound of summer, the humming of flies, the swish of crops in the wind. But all you get is the creak of the rafters and the occasional drip of condensation from the roof. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, breathing in the oily wool scent, and try not to sneeze. This middle-of-the-night pause wasn't viewed as an inconvenience. In fact, some medieval physicians thought it was healthier. Manuals from the period described the waking as a chance for digestion to finish, the body to settle, and the mind to reflect. Modern sleep scientists were surprised when they first came across this in old literature, but it makes sense. When your day starts before dawn and ends with dusk, your internal rhythms shift accordingly. But not everyone embraced it. A few noble families tried to break the pattern with heavy curtains, late-night music, or the use of strong herbal concoctions meant to knock you out cold: valerian root, poppy syrup, a bit of mandrake if you were feeling especially reckless. Spoiler alert, most of those were barely effective and occasionally lethal. Still wide awake, it's okay. Most people were. You're not failing at sleep, you're just living it the way your ancestors did. In fits, starts, and strange half-dreams. Eventually, you shift again, finding the least cold spot on the straw mattress. The dog lifts its head, snorts once, and settles back down. The fire hisses softly as a damp stick catches flame. You pull the blanket over your ears and let the darkness rock you gently back into second sleep. No alarms, no emails, just the creak of the wood and the weight of another long winter night wrapping around you like a slow lullaby. Second sleep fades into morning slowly, like mist peeling back from the fields, but you're not there yet. You're in that murky stretch where dreams blend with the creak of floorboards, and warmth feels like a trick your body is playing on itself, except someone just kicked you. It's your brother. Again. He's sprawled like a starfish across half the straw mattress, one crusty foot dangerously close to your face. You grunt, shove him with your elbow, and shift toward the edge, but there's not much space to go. See, sleeping alone is a luxury reserved for monks and nobles. For peasants, sleep is a communal act. You sleep with whoever shares your roof, and sometimes even people who don't. Cousins, in-laws, grandparents, neighbors passing through. Even that one peddler who traded a turnip for shelter during last week's storm. If there's floor space and something softish to lie on, it counts. This isn't some charming bonding experience. It's survival. Bodies mean heat, and in the dead of winter, warmth beats personal space every time, and the lines are blurry, literal and social. You and your siblings share a blanket that smells like fermented wool. Your parents curl up against the far wall, bundled beneath a patched-up cloak once used for plowing. And if someone has a baby, the infant gets the warmest spot, tucked like a secret into someone's chest. Everyone else rearranges around that tiny, squirming nucleus of need. Even livestock gets in on it. A goat might be tied to a bedpost, its breath misting as it chews on something suspiciously sock-shaped. Chickens flutter in the corners. The family dog, assuming you have one, nests at someone's feet, grumbling at the cold and chasing phantom rabbits in its sleep. And here's a detail to itch your imagination: bedbugs. Lots of them. Not just a few. Medieval beds, with their thatch stuffing and linen sheets when available, were paradise for insects. Peasants didn't change bedding often, sometimes not for years. It wasn't laziness, it was scarcity. Fabric was precious. Washing meant hauling water and risking illness. And soap was, well, not really soap as you know it. Think gritty animal fat mixed with ashes, so you scratch a little, then a lot, then stop, because now you're thinking about it too much. At least the kids are asleep. Right, wrong. One of them starts to cry. Maybe it's hunger. Maybe it's teething. Maybe they had a nightmare about falling into the pig pen again. Doesn't matter. Everyone stirs. Someone sighs loudly. Another person farts. Welcome to medieval co-sleeping. But here's the twist in some ways. This overcrowded situation was actually comforting. For all its discomforts, the shared sleeping arrangement created a sense of safety. You were never alone in the dark. You always had someone to talk to, grumble with, or huddle beside when the frost crept under the door. That said, not all midnight companionships were wholesome. Records tell of beds shared with distant relatives or guests where things got awkward. There were no guest rooms. If a traveling worker or pilgrim stayed the night, they slept in the same bed as someone else. And if that someone else happened to snore, grind their teeth, or roll over like a drunken cart horse, too bad. Complaining was considered bad manners unless it involved bodily fluids. Then you were allowed one groan, maybe two. Fun fact in some regions, there was a peasant tradition of bundling, where courting couples would share a bed overnight fully clothed, often with a wooden plank or a sewn-in sheet between them, a sort of medieval Netflix and no chill. Historians still argue whether this was a way to build trust or just an elaborate test of willpower. Regardless, you wake up every morning tangled in limbs, crushed against someone's back, and wondering why everyone insists on sleeping diagonally. If you've ever shared a bed with a toddler, you know the drill. Now imagine that, but the toddler is your 45-year-old cousin and hasn't bathed in a month. Still, sleeping arrangements varied. In some northern regions, beds were built into the wall like alcoves with wooden shutters, offering a tiny illusion of privacy. Think of them like medieval bunk beds, only colder, darker, and more likely to include a rat. And then there were the wealthy. Nobles and merchants might have their own chambers, even their own feather beds stuffed with goose down, canopied in heavy drapes to trap warmth, guarded by tapestries and fires that didn't die out by midnight. They had servants to tend the fire, change the sheets, and fluff the pillows. Meanwhile, you're adjusting your position so the hole in the blanket lines up with your least sensitive area. You wonder what it would be like to sleep in silence, alone, with no elbows in your ribs or hair in your mouth or someone's breath tickling the back of your neck. But then, just maybe, that silence would feel a little too big, too empty. A final thought as you drift again, some medieval people believed your dreams could be shaped by who you slept beside, that lying next to someone anxious might pass their fears to you, that sleeping with someone cheerful could brighten your own rest. It was more than just heat. It was energy. And while modern science might roll its eyes, you can't help but wonder if there's something to that. So you sigh, shift, and let the comforting weight of all those breathing bodies press around you like a human quilt. Not soft, not quiet, but somehow, just enough. You wake to the sound of something scuttling under your blanket. Don't panic, okay? Panic a little. It's either a mouse looking for crumbs or a flea that hitched a ride in your straw. Maybe both. You shake your leg and it vanishes, but the itching starts right on cue. You scratch, then stop, then scratch again. Welcome to medieval bedding, where nothing is hypoallergenic and everything is suspicious. Let's talk blankets, or what passes for them. In this century, there's no fluffy duvet, no microfiber anything, and certainly no electric warming pads. If you're a peasant, you sleep under whatever you can pile on. Maybe a worn woolen sheet, maybe an old tunic stitched into a makeshift quilt, or if you're especially lucky, a cured animal hide with the fur still clinging in tufts. In some cases, people got creative. Bark fibers could be spun and woven into coarse cloth. Not comfortable, but hey, it was free. Even nettles, stinging and all, were dried, processed, and turned into linen-like fabrics for the desperately poor. You're not warm. Exactly. You're just slightly less frozen than you'd be without it. A weird historical detail, some blankets were layered with straw inside them, like DIY insulation. Sounds smart, until you realize straw shifts, pokes, and crumbles into a million itchy fragments over time. Still, better that than waking up blue in the face. And you have heard the story of old widow Tamsin who froze to death mid-snore. Her family didn't even realize she was gone until the morning fire couldn't thaw her. So yes, warmth was a constant battle, and everything was about body heat. If you had no fire, no thick cloak, and no livestock to curl up with, your only hope was to trap your own warmth like a medieval baked potato. Some people even buried heated rocks or bricks in ash during the day, then wrapped them in cloth to use as bed warmers at night. The problem? Sometimes they cracked, or hissed, or, in rare but spectacular cases, exploded. But hey, it beat hugging your own knees till sunrise. And what's under you still straw, unless you're from a village rich enough to afford a pallet, a sort of mattress pad filled with moss, reeds, or feathers. The fanciest versions were called ticks, and you could stuff them with whatever softish material you had. Feathers. Sure, but also grass, wool scraps, seaweed, or, on bad days, rags shredded from old clothing. It flattened out within weeks and smelled like swamp after a month. But technically it was a mattress. Here's something that'll really make your skin crawl. Lice weren't just common. They were expected. Medieval peasants didn't consider them a sign of poor hygiene, just a fact of life. You could pick nits out of someone's hair by the fire while chatting about the harvest. Very normal. Very itchy. Children were especially prone, but adults weren't safe either. You even had little combs fine-toothed and usually made of bone or wood just for delousing each other before bed. A romantic way to spend the evening. Honestly. Then there were the rats. You hear them now, scrabbling in the rafters. One squeaks and disappears behind a wooden beam. Another darts across the hearthstone, its tail catching a glint of ember light. Rats were bold. They'd climb bedposts, chew through your provisions, and worst of all, nest in the straw under your head. You've woken up more than once to find bite marks in a heel of bread you foolishly saved for morning. Some people tried to drive them off with cats. Others believed hanging herbs, lavender, wormwood, tansy above the bed would repel them. But rats weren't easily swayed by superstition. They had the upper hand, or paw. Speaking of paws, your dog stirs and growls at nothing in particular. He's your heating pad, your foot warmer, and your rat deterrent, all in one snoring bundle. If he weren't constantly shedding into the bedding and drooling on your feet, he'd be perfect. But let's not forget smell. Your bedroom smells like sweat, wet wool, damp wood, smoke, cabbage, and possibly something decomposing in the thatch roof. This is just what sleep smells like in the Middle Ages. Scented pillows weren't a thing unless you stuffed yours with dried herbs. Some did. Lavender and chamomile were known for calming properties. But again, you need access to those things. And if you're a tenant farmer scraping through winter, your priority is food, not pillow potpourri. Ever heard of the nightcap? It wasn't just a cute accessory. People wore woolen caps to bed to keep their heads warm. The rest of the body might be wrapped up. But your scalp, ears, and nose were fully exposed to the air. Without a cap, your dreams could be cut short by frozen earlobes. Some caps even had flaps that tied under the chin, making you look like a sleepy gnome, but preserving every scrap of heat. Now let's toss in one final indignity: bed sharing with someone who's sick. Colds, coughs, rashes, fevers. There's no such thing as quarantine in a one-room home. If your sibling catches something, so do you. And if they sweat through their side of the bed, it seeps into your side too. You sleep in it. You stew in it. You wake up damp and vaguely resentful. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements contributed more to disease spread than unsanitary water. But honestly, why choose both were enthusiastic partners in medieval misery? Still, you manage to drift off again. Your body has learned how. You've trained yourself to ignore the itching, the cold, the noise, and the lingering sense that something just crawled across your foot. The darkness wraps around you once more, scratchy, heavy, and loud with breath and snore. This is sleep. This is enough. Your eyes flutter open again, But this time it's not the cold or a flea bite that wakes you. It's coughing, a dry, hacking kind, thick with phlegm and misery. Someone across the room, the old man who works the barley fields, is bent double, gasping into a rag. You turn over, groggy, and try not to breathe too deeply. In this house, sickness is shared like soup freely, and without consent, this, sadly, is the background hum of sleep during one of the most dangerous chapters in medieval history, the Age of Plague. The Black Death tore through Europe in the 14th century like wildfire through dry thatch. And while noble families retreated to countryside estates and locked their doors, peasants like you had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere clean, warm, or isolated, and sleep. Well, it changed. It had to. If someone in your home got sick, chances were high the rest would follow. The bedding became a shared petri dish, the air thick with spores and breath, the straw under your head a grave of germs. People didn't understand germ theory, of course, but they knew illness lingered. They could smell it, taste it, fear it. They called it miasma, bad air, and assumed it floated invisibly, creeping through rafters and door cracks like a spirit with a grudge. You try to pull your blanket up higher, but it's damp from condensation sweat. You don't want to know. In some villages, entire families were wiped out in a matter of days. The sick slept in the same place as the healthy because where else could they go? You've heard the stories. Everyone has. People waking up to find the person beside them stiff and gray. Mothers rocking children who wouldn't stir. The groaning, the fever dreams, the boils that oozed and burst, and then silence. Terrifying, unnatural silence. Here's a bleak little footnote. Some people believed sleeping too deeply could invite death. That slipping too far into unconsciousness made your soul too easy to snatch. So during plague outbreaks, people tried to stay half awake. They'd mutter prayers through the night, lie upright in bed, or even sit in chairs, nodding off and jerking awake, too afraid to surrender entirely. Not that it helped. In monasteries, monks would still chant their nighttime prayers over the dying. Compline was the last prayer of the day, offered in low, resonant tones, part lullaby, part eulogy. Sometimes families did the same, huddled around a loved one in bed, singing psalms through tears. No one got rest, just rituals, just waiting. And then there were the plague doctors. They didn't visit peasant homes much, you couldn't afford them, but their legends reached you anyway. Black robes, beaked masks stuffed with herbs, long sticks to prod the sick from a distance, like crows in human form. You once dreamed one stood at the foot of your bed, tapping your toe with that awful staff. You woke up screaming, but no one else even stirred. Historians still argue whether sleep itself changed during plague times. Was it lighter, more broken, full of hallucinatory dreams from fever and fear? Probably all of the above. One 14th century diary described the sickness of the night, when people fell asleep well and woke with madness in the head and cold in the feet. You read that once, and it's never left you. And the rituals around beds changed, too. If someone was clearly dying, they were laid out in a specific position facing the door, hands crossed. Sometimes holy water was sprinkled over the mattress. Sometimes, if no priest was nearby, a child would whisper the last rites. A child, because no one else was left standing. Sleep, in this world, carried a shadow. You never knew if you'd wake. You never knew if the person beside you would. Quirky bit of trivia: some people, out of sheer desperation, turned to talismans sewn into pillows. Not just saints' medallions, but stranger things. Dried toad bones, scraps of parchment with protective prayers, even corpse powders ground up bits of a holy person's grave, believed to ward off pestilence. Risky, sure. Illegal often. But when death is knocking, you don't ask too many questions. You sit up, rubbing your face. The air is damp and still. Someone farts. Someone mutters in a dream. The sick man coughs again, and still you try to sleep, because sleep is an escape. even if it's a dangerous one. It's the only place where the blisters don't hurt, where the fields aren't frozen, where the dead don't whisper your name. In dreams, there's bread without mold, fire without smoke, water that runs clear and cold. Some say that in the worst plague years, people slept more out of exhaustion, out of hopelessness, out of the grim belief that maybe they wouldn't wake, and that was fine, because waking meant another day of digging graves, boiling linens, weeping for someone you loved and losing track of which day it was. You're not there yet. Your village is still safe. For now. But there's a tightness in your chest, a heaviness in the house, and you know how quickly things can change. So you lie back, eyes open, listening, hoping that cough doesn't get worse, hoping tomorrow still comes. You're not even sure when you fell asleep again, but suddenly, you're jolted awake. Not by a noise, exactly. More like a presence. Your heart skips. The room is still no footsteps, no creaks, just the slow rhythm of breath and the occasional rustle of straw. But something feels wrong. A pressure on your chest, a weight pinning you to the mattress, invisible and heavy. You try to move, but your arms don't respond. Your legs are dead logs. You open your mouth to shout, but no sound escapes. This, you now know, is sleep paralysis. But in the Middle Ages, it was something far more sinister. You've just been visited by a nightmare demon. Every culture had a name for it. In England, it was the mare, a dark spirit that rode your chest and filled your dreams with terror. In Scandinavia, it was called Mara. In France, she was la cauchemar, literally, the pressing ghost. She crept through keyholes, perched on sleepers' ribs, and filled their lungs with dread. You don't understand it, but you feel it paralyzed, alert, and absolutely certain that something is in the room with you. A few breaths later, the pressure lifts. You can move again. You sit up gasping, sweating under a blanket that barely keeps you warm, and stare into the dark, convinced something just scurried out of sight. You're not alone in this. People across medieval Europe feared the night not just because of real dangers, but because of the imagined ones. Spirits, demons, witches, even dead relatives were believed to prowl after sundown. And the place they were most likely to attack you, your bed. Bedtime was vulnerable time. Your defenses were down. You couldn't watch your door, guard your animals, or clutch your rosary all night. And so you'd hope for protection candles burned low, a prayer murmured before sleep, or amulets tied around your bed frame. Some even drew protective circles in chalk or sprinkled salt under the mattress, anything to keep the nightmares out. And it wasn't just dreams. You were supposed to watch your behavior before bed. No overeating gluttony invited bad visions. No arguments, anger left the soul open. Even sleeping on your back was risky. That position left your chest exposed, a welcome mat for demonic visitors. Side sleeping was safest, ideally curled like a shrimp under a scratchy wool blanket. Historians still argue whether these night demons were metaphors for sleep disorders or deeply rooted cultural beliefs. Either way, people lived in fear of what happened when they closed their eyes. One fringe idea from the 14th century suggested that the soul left the body while you slept, and that's why dreams could carry you over mountains, into battles, or through the sky. The danger. If your soul wandered too far, something else might slip in while it was gone. Better to stay tethered, better to wake up often and light a candle now and then. And if you dreamed of fire, of falling of crows, bad omens, people kept dream books, not for fun, but as serious tools of divination. A dream about rotten teeth meant death. A dream about a green field could mean a good harvest. But a dream with no clear message, that was the worst of all proof that your soul was wandering untethered, collecting nonsense on its way back. Here's a quirky little belief. Some peasants thought that sleeping under particular trees would invite spirits into your dreams. Hawthorn and elder were especially feared, so if your house had beams made of elderwood, guess what, you were practically a portal, sweet dreams. Still, not every midnight vision was evil. Some saints were said to appear in dreams, offering advice or warnings. Visions of Mary or Jesus were treated with awe and, sometimes, suspicion. Was it really divine or a trick of the devil? Better go confess in the morning, just in case, to be safe. Some people drank calming herbal teas before bed, infusions of valerian, chamomile, or mugwort, but more often they relied on charms, dried flowers sewn into pillows, silver crosses tied around their necks, even little scraps of scripture tucked under the tongue. Tasted awful, still preferable to demon dreams. And let's not forget witches. Nighttime was their domain, or so people believed. If you woke with scratches, bruises, or a strange rash, it might not be the straw. It might be a witch riding you like a beast of burden in your sleep. There are records of witch-riding complaints where entire families swore they woke up sore and exhausted after nightly attacks. The church took these seriously sometimes, with tragic results. You glance toward the shuttered window, heart still racing from your earlier paralysis. Nothing moves. Nothing stares back. But you keep listening, just in case. In this century, fear doesn't need proof. It just needs the dark. Eventually, your pulse settles. You pull the blanket higher, shift onto your side, the safe position, and mutter a half-remembered prayer. Something about angels or goats. It's late. You're too tired to be precise. And as the house creaks and settles, you finally start to drift again. Slower this time. Wary, but not fighting it. Because as terrifying as the night can be, staying awake is worse. You wake again, this time not from fear, or cold, or anything supernatural, just life and chores. Because it's somewhere between midnight and dawn, and that odd wakeful stretch between first sleep and second sleep isn't just for dreams or demons. For medieval peasants like you, it's also prime time to get things done. You sit up in bed, or rather, on the lump of straw you've been calling a bed, and look around. The fire's nearly out, but you poke it back to life with a stick, careful not to wake the dog. A few embers spark, and in the dim orange glow you see your family shifting in their sleep, groaning softly, the occasional snore escaping from under the communal blanket. Now's your moment. Because weirdly enough, midnight was useful. Historians call this phenomenon the watch, that hour or two of wakefulness between sleep segments that people often used productively. You might think of it as insomnia, but back then it was routine, expected, even planned around. You grab a hunk of bread from the shelf, it's hard as stone, but you've got teeth in desperation. Chew carefully. Don't chip a molar. Then you pull on your cloak, tiptoe across the cold floor, and step outside into the freezing dark. Your breath clouds in front of you like smoke. The stars are sharp tonight, so many of them, bright and close, like someone poked holes in the heavens with an awl. There's no light pollution here, just moon, starlight, and the faint glow from a neighboring cottage. Someone else is up too. You make your way to the shed where the cow is kept. She's awake, blinks at you like, really. Again, you check her water. Still not frozen. You rub her flank with your sleeve, say something soft and familiar, and she huffs in response. The warmth of her body seeps into your hands. You don't linger, but that moment matters. In this cold, it always does. Back inside, you might mend a torn sleeve or patch a boot with waxed thread, or you might take out your spindle and twist a few more strands of wool. Quiet, useful things. The house is still. And in this pocket of night, your movements feel secret and sacred. If you're a woman, this might be the only time all day no one is asking for something. No one crying, shouting, needing bread or soup or stitches. Just you and the slow, repetitive comfort of working with your hands. Peaceful, in a way. And if you're a man, you might be sharpening tools, oiling straps, or checking that your ox hasn't broken free again. Remember that night 2 winters ago? Yeah, you're still apologizing to the neighbors for the damage to their fence. Some peasants used this time to read if they could, Literacy was rare, but not impossible. In some villages, a single person might own a book or two, passed down or copied laboriously by hand, religious texts, mostly, or practical guides, planting calendars, herbal remedies, prayers, which brings us to one of the most common midnight activities, prayer. Religious routines soaked every part of the medieval day, and night was no exception. If you lived near a monastery, you'd hear the distant echo of chanting, the monks reciting matins or lauds in Latin, their voices weaving through the cold air like ghosts. Even peasants, less strict in schedule, often used the middle of the night for spiritual reflection. You might kneel beside the fire, muttering prayers for your children, your crops, your aching joints, maybe asking forgiveness for that thing you said to your cousin about the goose. Look, it was your goose. You had every right. But here's the quirky part. Some villagers believed prayers worked better at night. The veil between worlds was thinner. The saints were listening more closely, maybe even the dead. So you'd pray softly, hum a hymn under your breath, and watch the fire dance like it understood you. Now and then, this time of night became a moment for storytelling. If someone else in the house woke too, maybe a child or elder, you'd share tales to pass the hour. Stories of wandering spirits, brave knights, talking animals, or the time the devil himself supposedly tried to buy flour from the mill. Spoiler, he didn't pay. Shocker. Some people even kept night tasks by the bed spindles, knives, bits of carving wood, things small enough to manage without waking everyone else. No one wasted time if they could help it. And when winter nights stretched 14 hours long, you had to make use of the pause. This also meant some villagers held late-night meetings, secret ones, planning a festival, deciding how to divide grazing land, sometimes more serious matters, settling feuds, or quietly deciding what to do about a neighbor who might be a witch. Those talks definitely not loud, definitely not official, but they happened. Historians still debate whether this watch was encouraged or simply tolerated. Was it cultural, biological, a survival tactic? Probably all three. What's certain is that for much of the medieval world, this nocturnal intermission was as routine as bread and toil. Eventually, your eyes start to feel heavy again. You stoke the fire just enough to keep the chill from biting too deep, then tuck yourself back into the nest of scratchy cloth, half-mashed straw, and the warm bulk of your still snoring family. The rooster hasn't crowed yet. There's still time for second sleep. You let yourself drift, not abruptly, but like a leaf on a slow current, into that last stretch of rest before the world demands your labor again. You don't own a clock. No one does, not anyone you know. Anyway, the idea of telling time down to the minute is as foreign as ice in summer, but still, time marches on. And in the medieval world, it's measured not by numbers but by shadows, sounds, and instincts honed by endless repetition. You stir again sometime later, unsure whether you've really slept or just drifted in a haze of warmth and wood smoke. And then there it is, the rooster. He lets loose a guttural creak-a-doodle from somewhere outside, and the entire house seems to groan with you, not because it's loud, but because it means something very specific. Your night is over. Roosters are your alarm clocks. So are church bells, dogs barking, the sun brushing light against the window shutter, and your mother shouting that someone needs to fetch water before the bucket freezes again. These are the rhythms that tell you when to rise, when to eat, when to pray, when to run. But in the deep folds of night, before the cock crows, people had other ways to keep time. Candle clocks, for instance. A candle marked with lines would burn slowly, each segment roughly equal to half an hour. Wealthy households might have these, and even scented ones, each segment perfumed differently to mark the passing hours. Imagine your clock smelling like lavender at 1 SM and clove at 2. Fancy, yes. Affordable for you. Not even close. What about the peasant version? You burn a lump of tallow or animal fat in a small dish and guess, that's it. Maybe you use a stick to track how much wax has dripped. Maybe you don't bother at all and just let your body tell you when it's time. And that body, It's shockingly good at keeping time. You wake at the same hour most nights. Eat when your belly complains. Rest when the light fades. No Fitbits, just fatigue and familiarity. You've trained yourself to follow the sun when it shows up. That is, here's something clever in some villages. People used marked tapers, homemade candles with little nails or pebbles inserted at intervals. When the wax melted and a nail dropped, it made a clink on the metal dish. Instant audio alarm. Granted, that only worked if you weren't already asleep when it clinked, or if the dog didn't eat the candle. That happened. Once, it was messy. Other timekeepers included hourglasses, though those were rare and usually found in churches or monasteries. Monks relied on them to maintain their strict schedules of prayer throughout the night. In fact, monastic life was so tied to time that they divided their days into 7 canonical hours. Matins, lauds, prime. You forget the rest, but you remember the bells. Those bells rang across the valley like a ghostly heartbeat. Sometimes they'd wake you, even through shuttered windows and thick fog. You didn't always know what prayer they marked, but you knew what it meant. Someone, somewhere, was awake, whispering to God while you lay huddled in straw. Some travelers used star clocks, watching how constellations moved across the sky, not precise, but functional. Orion appears over the eastern hill around the time your father gets up to start the fire. That's good enough. Quirky fact for you in certain parts of Europe. The wealthy owned water clocks basins that dripped slowly into marked containers. These were used indoors, especially by scholars and doctors. Of course, if your roof leaked, or your goat drank from it, or someone mistook it for soup, well, time got weird. There's also the noon mark, a small carving or notch on a windowsill that caught the sunbeam at exactly midday. Yours doesn't have one, but the church tower does. You've seen it when you go into town. The way the sun hits it at just the right moment, it makes you feel like the world is ticking, in its own stubborn way. And let's not forget natural cues. The birds change their songs as dawn creeps in. The fire crackles differently when the damp air shifts. Your joints ache more around 3 or 4. No joke, that's a peasant barometer. That's if your knees are stiff. The frost is close. If your fingers tingle, the sun's almost up. So when you hear the rooster now, you know it's late enough that getting back to sleep would be pointless. Your chores will begin soon. Water needs fetching. The cow's udder probably aches. The field waits under a blanket of dew or frost, or mud, or all three, and someone in the house is definitely going to want porridge. You roll to your side, sighing into the blanket. Part of you wants to cling to the last threads of sleep, pretend the rooster was just clearing his throat, but your body already knows. It's time. You rise in the dim glow of early light, feeling the stiffness in your spine, the straw clinging to your hair, the soft rustle of someone else still snoring nearby. The fire's gone to ash again. The room is colder now, but you're not alone. No one sleeps forever here, not unless they're being carried out feet first. You stretch, yawn, and reach for your tunic. The day begins, as it always does, not with ceremony, but with quiet movement, and the slow creak of a world waking up by instinct, not numbers. By the time you step outside, the village is starting to stir. Smoke curls from a few crooked chimneys. Someone's chopping wood in the distance. You can hear the rhythmic thump of a butter churn nearby and the soft bleating of sheep. Another day begins, and you're already tired. But let's talk about something weird. Because even though you live in a world ruled by weather, labor, and livestock, your sleep is sometimes disturbed by things that can't be explained away by a cold wind or a hungry stomach. You dream strange things, vivid things. You've heard your uncle shout full conversations in his sleep, complete with hand gestures. Once, your neighbor sleepwalked all the way into the village square and tried to harvest the baker's cart with a rake. And yes, people talk about it, behind their hands, at the well, at the market. Because sleep in your world isn't just rest, it's mystery. Some people believe dreams are divine messages. Others say they're leftover thoughts from supper. But everyone agrees sleep is when things go sideways. Sleepwalking. For example, you've seen it. It's eerie. Eyes wide open, feet moving. But the mind is somewhere else entirely. In medieval times, it wasn't called sleepwalking. It was often described in Latin as noctambulatio or in plain speech as night wandering, and it wasn't always seen as harmless. In some regions, sleepwalkers were thought to be touched by spirits, or worse, witches in disguise. One story you know too well, a boy from 2 villages over wandered out during the new moon, walked right into the river, and nearly drowned. When pulled out, shivering and confused, he swore he'd just been dreaming of walking through a silver field. No one's sure if he was lying, bewitched, or just very tired. But people started sleeping with doors latched and windows barred after that. Then there's the curse of yawns. Yes, really. It's said that yawning without covering your mouth lets your soul escape, or worse, invites a wandering spirit in. Mothers teach their children early, cover your mouth, or something might slip past your lips and settle in for the night. So now you do it without thinking, even alone, even in the dark. Historians still debate whether this superstition came from religious fear or pre-Christian folklore. Some say it's just an old wives' tale. Others insist it's rooted in deep anxieties about the soul's vulnerability during rest. And when you've seen someone yawn and then fall ill the next day, well, you don't take chances. And then there are the dreams that feel real. Not like fantasies. Not like those blurry visions of flying or bread or dancing in the market square with someone's goat. These dreams have weight. They leave your chest tight, your hands sweaty. Dreams where someone speaks to you, clearly and directly. Sometimes it's a dead relative. Sometimes it's a strange figure in white robes or with glowing eyes. Sometimes they give warnings. You've had one of those. A week before the mill caught fire, you dreamed of smoke choking the trees. You woke up coughing, said nothing, then it happened. Coincidence, maybe, but try explaining that to your neighbors. Quirky note in some regions. People recorded dreams in vision books, not just nobles or monks, regular folks too, though usually dictated to someone who could write. These books weren't private diaries. They were community records. If 5 people dreamed of wolves circling the village in the same week, someone took that seriously. Dream interpreters, or one-ira critics, were sometimes sought for their insight. You've heard of one woman in the next village over who dreams in riddles and symbols. People walk miles just to tell her about a dream involving a white fish or a baby with no mouth, hoping she can tell them what it means. Is it the weather? Is it a curse? Is it just indigestion? One local priest preaches that dreams are tools of the devil, meant to distract you from work and prayer. But even he once admitted to a strange dream about being chased by ravens through a field of teeth. He turned it into a sermon somehow, something about sin. But you saw his hands shaking, and you don't know what to believe. Some mornings you wake from dreams so comforting, you wish you could stay in them. Others leave you rattled, too shaken to speak. One time, you dreamed you were in a warm room made of glass and glowing stones, where food appeared without cooking and voices came from the air. No smoke, no lice, no cold, just comfort. You woke up crying. People say those are glimpses of heaven, or maybe memories from another life. But mostly, you keep those dreams to yourself. Still, there's something oddly reassuring about this shared weirdness. Everyone dreams. Everyone sleep talks or twitches or gasps in the night. And even the toughest farmer or gruffest herdsman has confessed, usually by the fire after a long day, to waking in a sweat, convinced something touched their hand in the dark. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. Sleep is where rules bend, where the world tilts just enough to make you question it. And while the church tries to make sense of it with sermons and scripture, and your grandmother tries with charms and candles, the truth is no one really understands what happens in your head when the fire burns low. But come morning, you shake it off, you wipe your eyes, you stretch, you yawn covered, of course, and you get back to work. because dreams don't bake bread, nightmares don't thatch roofs, and spirits, real or imagined, don't haul buckets of water. Still, sometimes you glance behind you, just in case. Let's say, for once, you're not sleeping at home. Maybe your village sent you on a 2-day errand to trade grain in the next shire, or you're following your cousin to a nearby fair. Either way, you're far from your familiar straw pile, and now it's nighttime. So where do you sleep? You don't exactly book a room in advance. There's no parchment-based reservation system, and there's no promise of a bed, either. If you're lucky, and we're talking medieval peasant luck here, you find space at a roadside inn. But inn is a generous word. It's more like a cramped, smoky tavern where beds are rented by the space, not by the head. You step inside, ducking beneath a low beam, and immediately get slapped in the face by warmth, ale stink, and the scent of roasted something. Maybe rabbit, maybe rat. You don't ask. You just nod to the innkeeper, put down a few coins or trade goods, and hope they haven't filled all the straw pallets yet. Forget privacy. The main sleeping area is often just the floor of the tavern or a drafty loft overhead, where travelers lie shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in cloaks and prayer. If there are actual beds, wobbly wood frames with lumpy stuffing, you won't be in one alone. They're shared by total strangers. 1 foot here, 1 elbow there, everyone avoiding eye contact and pretending to be asleep. It's like a human puzzle made of exhaustion and mild body odor. Bed linens don't expect them to be changed. Ever. And if they have been washed recently, it's with lye soap and freezing water, which only ever half finishes the job. You lie down knowing full well that you're snuggling into the invisible residue of 100 previous guests, some of whom may have died, literally, in the bed last winter. You scratch. Then there's the noise. Inns are social centered. People drink, sing, argue, play dice. Someone's always stumbling through the door just as you're falling asleep. You hear shouts, laughter, a scuffle, then a crash, a dog barks, a baby wails. Somewhere outside, a donkey starts braying like it has a personal vendetta against you, and above it all the snores, not gentle ones, the kind that suggests someone's been possessed by a bellows. Sleep? It's a maybe. Still, the novelty can be exciting. You overhear travelers from distant towns talking about wild weather, strange beasts in the woods, or a lord's daughter who ran away with the baker's apprentice. You learn things. You share your own tales. You lie in the dark, staring at the thatched ceiling, wondering what else is out there. Then someone rolls over and elbows you in the spleen, and the magic dies a little. A weird historical tidbit: some inns provided rope beds for the truly budget-conscious. You'd pay to sit upright, backs against the wall, with a rope strung across your chest to stop you from slumping forward as you dozed, like human laundry hanging to dry. In the morning, the innkeeper would cut the rope to wake everyone, hence the origin of that phrase. It's not exactly luxury, but hey, it's vertical. If no inn is available or you can't afford even the rope, there's always the church porch. Churches were sanctuaries in more ways than one, and travelers sometimes slept beneath their eaves. It wasn't officially allowed, but most priests turned a blind eye. As long as you didn't snore during morning mass, you curl up beside the stone wall, wrapped in your cloak, and pray it doesn't rain. It probably will. Some peasants even slept in barns. Not a bad deal. Actually, soft hay, animal heat, a bit of privacy if the livestock aren't too loud. Just be sure to ask permission first, or at least leave a chicken behind as thanks. And then, of course, there's the worst-case scenario: sleeping under the stars. Romantic. Right, not so much. There's the damp, the insects, the constant fear of thieves, wolves, or things that go crack in the bushes. You try to wedge yourself between tree roots or under a hedge. You cover your face with your hood. You don't sleep much, but you survive. Interestingly, some travelers preferred this, believing that open air was healthier than stuffy taverns or lice-infested beds. Those people were either brave, delusional, or traveling with a very loud dog. But no matter where you sleep, certain rules apply. You keep your shoes on. Always, Not for comfort, but for a fast getaway. You keep your pouch of coins or turnips or whatever you're bartering inside your clothes. Right against the skin. Yes, it's sweaty. Yes, it's safer. And you don't talk too much. Not in the dark. Night is for whispering, for watching, for pretending you're not listening to the two strangers next to you argue about stolen chickens. Sleep away from home teaches you to appreciate your own straw pile, your dog, your goat, even your snoring brother, because at least there, you know whose feet are near your face. Eventually, you drift, maybe not into deep sleep, but into that foggy half place where dreams feel thin and time skips like a scratched record. And when the rooster crows tomorrow, no matter where you are, you'll stretch, blink into the morning haze, and think never again. Until next time. Sometimes you don't even make it to a bed or straw pile, or patch of hay, or roped up wall perch. Sometimes sleep sneaks up on you while you're standing in a field, kneeling in a pew, or crouched under a wagon waiting for the rain to stop. Because life as a medieval peasant is exhausting, soul deep, bone heavy, body aching exhaustion, the kind that doesn't wait for bedtime. It just hits you when it hits you and you drop. Field naps are the most common. You're out at dawn, scything barley or hauling stones or planting seeds in soil so stiff it might as well be baked bread. And sometime afternoon, with the sun warm on your back and your stomach full of onion and crusty bread, you find yourself squatting in the shade of a low wall. Your eyelids betray you. You close them just for a second, and when you open them again, it's been half an hour. Your hand still clutches a weeding stick. Your jaw clicks from the awkward angle. There's dirt in your ear. Welcome to the peasant power nap. Not elegant, not planned, but necessary. Sleep during the day is rarely a luxury. It's a surrender. Your body simply gives up, especially during harvest, when the work stretches from before dawn until after dusk. And the only time you stop moving is when your muscles literally stop working. And it's not just the fields. You've seen people doze off in the strangest places, sitting on a plow, leaning against a bread oven, even mid-sentence at market. One time, your cousin fell asleep mid-step while chasing a runaway duck, just folded, like a puppet with cut strings. The duck escaped, the cousin denies everything. Then there are naps in the church. No one admits to them. Everyone takes them. The church is one of the only buildings in the village with a stone floor, high ceiling, and sometimes even a bit of warmth, especially if it's packed for mass. You settle onto a bench, your cloak around your shoulders, the priest's voice droning in Latin you barely understand, incense swirling in gentle clouds, and you're gone. Not deeply, not obviously, just that subtle, head-dipping, chin-bobbing kind of doze that even the priest pretends not to notice unless you snore. Then someone nudges you with a sharp elbow and a sharper glare, not out of disrespect, just envy. They were almost asleep too. Fun fact, medieval clergy actually documented this kind of sleep, especially in monasteries. Monks often drifted during long nighttime vigils or pre-dawn chants, heads tucked into hoods, bodies swaying like reeds in the choir stalls. One chronicler described an entire abbey where monks had mastered the art of sitting upright while fully unconscious. Impressive, honestly. There's even an old term for this kind of half-sleep dormiveglia, the space between waking and dreaming. It's the moment when you forget what you're doing, but not who you are, where thoughts feel like fog, where your name feels soft in your mouth. If you could speak it, you've experienced that in a field, maybe, with the sun hot on your shoulders and the wheat whispering around you, or inside the bakehouse, as the dough rose slowly and the fire crackled, and someone's lullaby for their baby made you feel 12 years old again. The world doesn't stop for naps, but sometimes it slows, just enough to let you catch your breath. Another odd place people fall asleep. The bathhouse. Granted, you don't visit often, bathing is a rare treat, but when you do go, and you've had a bit of warmed beer or cider, and someone's rubbed your shoulders with a bit of rosemary oil, and your skin feels clean for once, and you're sitting in a pool of not freezing water for the first time all season. Yeah, You drift. People snore in bathhouses. People drown in bathhouses sometimes, when sleep and wine mix too deeply. That's why the bath maid keeps a stick nearby, to poke anyone who slips too low. No one wants to fish out another snoring miller from the bottom of the tub. And don't forget carts. You've napped in a creaky, rumbling cart, bumping along a rutted road, head lolling, teeth clacking with every stone. You've even used a sack of carrots as a pillow. Was it comfortable? Not remotely? Did it work for about 15 minutes? Until the wheel broke? Again. But perhaps the most important naps, the ones that save you, are the stolen moments at home. When the fire's burning low but steady, when the house is quiet for once, when the baby's fed and the cow isn't mooing and no one's asking for anything, you sit down on the bench near the hearth and close your eyes, just for a breath. That's all. And then, 2 hours pass. You wake groggy, a bit confused, neck aching, but lighter, more human, less like a walking sack of calluses and complaints. Historians still argue whether these scattered naps made up for poor nighttime sleep or simply added to the cycle of exhaustion. Did peasants thrive on fragmented rest or merely survive it? Was it adaptive or just unavoidable? But you know the truth, it didn't matter. You slept when you could, not because you wanted to, but because your body refused to keep going, and no one judged you for it. Because they understood, because they were just as tired, because sleep, in your world, was like sunlight in winter, brief, fleeting, essential. If anyone knew about sleep and how to weaponize it, it was the monks. While you scraped together rest between hauling buckets and pulling weeds, monks were carefully orchestrating their sleep like a sacred ritual. And yet, somehow, they were always tired. Because the life of a monk wasn't one of quiet naps in sunlit cloisters, it was a symphony of midnight prayers, half-lit corridors, and never-ending vigils. Let's back up. Monastic life in the Middle Ages ran on an ironclad schedule called the Liturgy of the Hours. The day wasn't chopped into morning, noon, and night. It was segmented into 7, sometimes 8 sacred time blocks: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each marked by prayer, each signaled by a bell. And yes, some of these happened in the middle of the night. Matins, for instance, could be called anywhere from midnight to 2 a.m. That meant monks woke up from their first sleep, if they had any, shuffled into the dark, and filed into the chapel in silence, robes whispering across cold stone, breath visible in the candlelight. They chanted for an hour or more Gregorian melodies echoing against stone walls, then returned to their cells to catch a second sleep before rising again for lauds at dawn. If that sounds exhausting, it was, and not optional. Monastic sleep was deliberately fragmented. Sleep, they believed, was a temptation, a luxury that dulled the soul. You were meant to be tired. You were meant to push through drowsiness as an act of devotion, denying the body so the spirit could rise. One chronicler even claimed the devil did his best work between matins and lauds, when monks were most vulnerable to sloth. So sleep less, pray more. But monks didn't just suffer sleep, they studied it. Some abbots noticed that younger monks couldn't stay awake during long vigils, so they introduced sleep rules: how many hours, when to nap, how to sit upright on a bench without slumping over. One order even developed a special curved wooden chair designed to keep you slightly uncomfortable, so you wouldn't accidentally drift too far into dreamland. Genius cruel both. A few monasteries embraced segmented sleep, much like peasants did, but more structured. Sleep for a few hours, wake to pray, sleep again, wake for mass, sleep. Copy a manuscript until your hand cramps, sleep. Garden, sleep. Always in pieces, never enough. Now here's something that'll make you blink. Monks could be punished for sleeping too well. Seriously. Dozing off during prayers. That's a penance. Falling asleep at the wrong hour. More penance. Snoring in chapel. You're getting assigned extra fasting days. One monk, according to legend, had to recite the entire book of Psalms aloud while standing barefoot in the snow as punishment for snoring during matins. Historians still argue whether that's real or just a very aggressive moral tale. Of course, not all monks were spiritual machines. Some cheated, fell asleep in latrines, napped in the garden while contemplating, wrapped themselves in extra wool during long chants, and nodded off mid-hymn. One famously lazy monk even built a fake wall behind his cell so he could hide and nap during scheduled duties. Iconic behavior, and yet, for all its austerity, monastic sleep sometimes sounds peaceful. Imagine lying alone in a small stone room, a single candle flickering beside you, wrapped in coarse linen with the smell of wax and parchment around you, the wind howling outside, but your space still safe. No dogs, no cousins, just the quiet weight of centuries of prayer. But even outside monasteries, religion shaped how regular people thought about sleep. Sleep too long, sloth. Sleep at the wrong time, rebellion. Sleep during Sunday Mass. Double sin. The church taught that sleep should be modest, not indulgent, rest enough to work well, but not enough to dream about dancing nuns and bread that replenishes itself. That dream again still unexplained. Some saints reportedly slept only 2 hours a night, if at all. Catherine of Siena went days without rest, claiming to survive on divine energy alone. Others, like Saint Benedict, warned against over-resting the flesh, which sounds like something your grandfather might have said after catching you napping in the barn. Yet there were exceptions. Pilgrims walking hundreds of miles were allowed longer rest. The sick were encouraged to sleep for healing. Even certain feast days came with special permissions: longer sleep, softer bedding, extra food, small mercies in a harsh world. And then, of course, there were deathbeds. Sleep and death blurred in religious thought. People spoke of the long sleep, or God's sleep, when someone passed peacefully. A good death meant falling asleep in grace, surrounded by prayer, clutching a cross, eyes closed like a resting monk. One priest once told you that heaven was an eternal rest. At the time, you found that comforting. Now, after years of broken, aching, interrupted sleep, it sounds like the best thing anyone's ever said. Still, you get up. You go on. Because even the monks half asleep, half chanting, wake up each day and do it all again. So you figure you can too. It's hard to say exactly what you dream about. You wake up more often remembering the pain in your hips or the chicken trying to roost on your feet than the dream you were having. But sometimes, just sometimes, it lingers, a sliver of something soft and strange, like steam curling over morning porridge. And what do peasants dream about? Bread. That's the short answer. Warm, crusty bread slathered with honey. Bread that never runs out, no matter how many slices you take. Bread so soft it could only exist in heaven. It sounds silly. Maybe. But when your real-life diet is stale grain mush and watery ale, your sleeping brain doesn't waste time on abstract ideas. It dreams of comfort. There are no diaries for people like you, no velvet-bound journals detailing nightly visions, but in stories passed down, in the mumblings shared over cold morning fire, you get a picture medieval peasants dreamed of: warmth, food, light, and sometimes just stillness. A soft breeze through ripe fields, a bed without bugs, a night without being cold or afraid. Dreams were practical, survival-based, not dragons or castles unless those dragons were roasting turnips or hoarding salted pork. Even fantasy had to pass through the lens of need. You once dreamed of a pillow stuffed with goose down. You cried when you woke up with straw poking your cheek. That's not to say there weren't stranger dreams. People whispered about true dreams, visions of things to come. If someone dreamed of blood in the river, everyone watched the water for days. If they dreamed of a burning tree, you told the blacksmith to check his forge. Even the church allowed for the idea that dreams might carry warnings from God or temptations from the devil. The lines were blurry, always blurry. You knew an old woman who dreamed of her dead husband every full moon, not in grief, but as if he were still alive. She'd ask him about the sheep, about the weather. He never answered, just smiled. She said it helped her sleep. Others thought it meant she was not far behind him. She passed that winter, peacefully, asleep. Some people believed dreams could be traded, that if you whispered a bad dream to a dog or spat into the fire while reciting it, it would leave you. Others thought good dreams could be stolen if someone touched your forehead before you spoke in the morning. You never let your brother get that close. Dream interpretation was common, even among the unlettered. You didn't need a book to know that dreaming of wolves meant betrayal, or that a dream of falling meant illness. You just knew. Everyone did. It was part of the air you breathed, the fire you stared into, the field you worked. Here's a quirky belief: if you slept with a piece of bread under your pillow, you'd dream of your future spouse. You tried it once, dreamed of a goat. You never told anyone. Some dreams made you feel lighter, like the one where the village floated above the trees, tethered to the earth by ropes woven from hair, or the one where your hands were made of beeswax and everything you touched turned golden. You woke up smiling. Then your foot hit the cold floor and snapped the dream like a twig. Still, dreams were precious. They didn't cost anything. They couldn't be taxed. No lord could take them. No bishop could excommunicate them. And when you had nothing else, no coin, no bread, no dry boots, you still had dreams. Not that you always remembered them. Some nights passed in a blank fog. Others left you with flickers: a red door, a woman in a green veil, a giant wheel turning in the sky. You'd carry those images through the day like talismans, not because you understood them, but because they were yours. A secret world stitched into your brain by whatever strange miracle sleep truly was. And maybe the dreams weren't yours at all. Maybe, as one village fool used to mutter, we dream each other, that every night the world folded in on itself and shuffled our minds like a deck of cards, that your neighbor's dream of drowning might explain your sudden fear of wells. You laughed at him then. Now you wonder. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly valued dreams or simply endured them, but you know what they meant to you. Dreams gave you something to look forward to, a break from the ache in your feet, from the drip in the roof, from the sting of smoke in your eyes and the grumbling stomach you've named like a family pet. Dreams were soft rebellion. You couldn't choose your life, but for a few short hours each night your mind wandered where your body never could. And when you woke, blinking into another gray morning, back cracked from bad straw, you still had the memory, a hint of something sweeter, a reminder that even in mud and manure, your spirit reached for something better. Even if that something was just a warm loaf and a quiet bed. The fire is low again. You lie still beneath your coarse blanket, straw poking your shoulder blades, the sounds of the village just beginning to stir outside. A chicken cackles, a cartwheel creaks. Somewhere in the distance, someone curses the cold. The rhythm of morning returns, slow but unrelenting. And yet, tonight lingers in your bones. You didn't sleep well, but you slept like your ancestors piecemeal, uncomfortable, surrounded by bodies and creatures and stories. It was a night stitched together from ritual, necessity, and strange endurance. And now, as the frost clings to the inside of your window shutter, you wonder, could someone like you survive a single medieval night? Let's tally it up. First, the physical challenge. You traded your memory foam mattress and weighted blanket for a straw pallet stuffed with lice and regret. You spent the night freezing, your nose crusted with ice, your toes tucked into the folds of a tunic that smells vaguely like fermented cabbage. No insulation, no central heat, just a smoldering fire, some goat breath, and your own stubborn will to live. Then there's the company. You shared that bed with your siblings, your aunt, the family dog, a wandering priest who needed a place to sleep, and at least one chicken with a personal vendetta. Someone elbowed you in the ribs, someone else drooled on your arm. Privacy, non-existent. Your deepest personal moment was when no one noticed you quietly sobbing into the corner of a scratchy wool blanket. Next, the fear. You spent a good 20 minutes paralyzed by what you still swear was a demon pressing on your chest. You whispered a prayer to 3 saints and your dead grandfather, just in case. You heard rats in the walls. One of them might have laughed at you. Sleep was broken, interrupted, lit by candles, shaken by chores, chilled by wind. You dozed, woke, dozed again. At one point, you drank warm beer because water was dangerous and also frozen. You checked on the cow. You mended a sock. You stoked the fire with something you really hope wasn't part of last season's thatch. And the dreams, oh, the dreams. You dreamed of bread. You dreamed of silence. You dreamed of being able to sleep without a chicken on your face. So, could you make it? Let's be honest. Probably not. Your back would rebel. Your skin would break out in protest. You'd develop a very intimate relationship with fleas by midnight, and by dawn, you'd be trying to explain to a medieval healer why you believe in soap. But more than that, you'd feel the weight, not just of the cold or the straw or the scratchy blanket, but of the sheer grind of it all. The fact that sleep wasn't a place to rest. It was a line you tiptoed between exhaustion and survival. Between the fire going out and the baby waking up, between one more day of toil and one last night of peace. Your ancestors didn't sleep like you do now. They slept like warriors, with every breath negotiated, every shiver ignored, every strange dream packed away like a prayer. Still, maybe you could learn, given time. Maybe your skin would toughen, your ears would ignore the snores. You'd find a rhythm in the waking and sleeping, the drifting and returning. You'd learn to love the glow of embers, the softness of dreams that come between one chant and the next. You'd sleep less, maybe, but live more in the moments when rest came, because medieval sleep wasn't restful, but it was real. So now, as the sun rises pale over a frostbitten thatched roof, you sit up slowly. The blanket falls from your shoulders. Your breath fogs in the cold air, and somehow you made it. Maybe not comfortably, but completely. And that's worth something.